This is Breaking Down Security, and I'm Brian Brake. Welcome back, listener. This is Brian and Mr. Betcher for Breaking Down Security.
Hello.
Hello, sir. Hello. It is June the 11th. Can you believe it's already halfway through the year?
No.
It's
crazy.
Yeah, it's getting to being about the 15th of June, which for those of you, I'm going to shift gears here, but for those of you who are doing our DerbyCon CTF, that was when the clue for the podcast was supposed for the next stage of the CTF for the podcast, and a free ticket to DerbyCon was supposed to come out. So, what do we think about that, Mr. Betcher? Is there a clue or something that we could probably give our people?
Yes, there is a clue.
Yeah. Do you want to wait till the end
be?
of the podcast or somewhere in the middle of the podcast to talk about that?
Yeah.
That way people
we'll
aren't
do it
just,
at the end.
Yeah, we don't want
to
to.
The middle.
Yeah, we'll find some nice place to put it because we don't want people just listening to the first 5 minutes and then scooting along. So, if you do want to work on the CTF, you have to go back to our 2016 017 episode about networking, where you can get the first clue and then subsequently second and third clues go on from there. So, so this is the podcast where you'll get your stage 3 clue if you're at stage 3 now. We only have 8 people doing the CTF now. That bothers me because there seems to be a lot of people who are needing tickets to DerbyCon. So, okay. So to get back on track, how was your week, Mr. Betcher?
Oh, busy fighting hackers all week.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, things are good.
Cool.
It's fun and exciting.
Well, it always is, and it seems like it's we talked last week. Oh, you know what? I have a story that I'd like to talk about. So we talked to Earl Carter last week. That was a great podcast about Angler exploit. He dissected the Angler malware.
Angler exploit kit. It's not malware.
Oh, God bless. Angler exploit kit EMET. From what I remember, there was a news story 6 days ago, which would have been great if they'd have put it out 8 days ago, because then we could have talked to Earl about it. But apparently, the new versions of Angler exploit kit are evading EMET, which is Microsoft's Enhanced Mitigation Experience Toolkit. So it's a toolkit used to kind of like a poor man's IDS, I guess, that would notice weird stuff going on and report it. But it's able to sidestep that in many cases because it's running exploit kit. The exploit kit is running malware and payloads that exist outside of certain parts of the protected memory. So,
nice.
Yeah. And this came out, and I retweeted on Twitter. And I was like, damn it, why couldn't we not have talked to Earl about this like 8 days ago? Why couldn't they come out with this? So, I put a link in the show notes about it. It's just interesting. It's actually a fairly decent write-up from a threat intel company about various ways that they're doing a great job showing how these exploit kits and frameworks are evolving, and how they're
that's how you adhere to the malware management framework, right? You read these reports and adjust your detection capabilities based on the new stuff coming out.
Yeah,
stuff that things that Angler techniques that it uses. Well-known hackers, guys like Carlos Perez comes to mind.
Carlos Perez is a hacker?
Yes.
Oh, that's true. He does. Yeah, he does like to tear things apart and see how they work.
He's one of the best.
Yeah.
And HD, if they come up with a new technique, they'll write up about it. It's good for defenders to read the the new stuff that comes out and
Yeah.
be prepared for it. So
Yeah. I was listening to Earl talk when I was doing the editing of the podcast, and I got that it felt like he almost had a grudging respect or even a little bit of, I don't want to say admiration for these guys, but it seems like I mean, there's a begrudging um, respect from kind of the white hat to the black hats there that that he respects that their skills are where they're at. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but it did seem like that he had a bit of admiration for the tactics and tools and stuff that they use to get around regular stuff.
that's right. I mean, he studies it a lot, and I guess he wouldn't be studying it if it weren't something to be admired, I guess.
Mm.
Something that did have a lot of work put into it. And it is, if not one of the top exploit kits out there.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Currently, and it's constantly being updated. So, and you see, because of the news article, they are still updating it. It is alive and kicking.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, yeah, this was what they found was it was bypassing EMET on Windows 7 and complex multi-layered code obfuscation and leveraging multiple exploits. So yeah, what it was doing, we talked about that, where it would drop one payload and then that payload would be used to drop a second payload. So it was using a multi-stage kind of payload to be able to push out a flash object, or in this case it says they were using Silverlight or VB script to do additional multi stages. So
typically the dropper, the first payload, what you're talking about is the super secret sauce, the one that you really have to watch out for. Mm-hmm. And then the second payload would be the garden variety malware. Yeah. Right. That gets dropped.
Very cool. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Once I get smart and pass my OSCP, I want to start, playing around with some malware and maybe poke Mr. Goff a little bit on that. So, speaking of malware, we were talking about we were talking to Earl last week and Ben the week before that. One of the things that I know that a lot of people like to do when they're investigating malware is they like to capture it, or they like to, you can't just maybe disinfect the machine. If you're analyzing malware, you kind of have to know what it's doing or where it's going and how it's affecting the box. So you can't kill it immediately. So one of the tactics that people like to use is something called DNS sinkholing. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today is how to set up a honeynet using, setting up sinkholing and what it is and how that works.
Oh, we're going to talk about how to set it up? I thought we were just going to talk about what it is.
Well, no, there's a fun little tutorial on the SANS website there on how to use bind to set up a sinkhole. I mean, cool. Obviously, it only works for certain types of malware, and then we'll explain why that is later on. But yeah, maybe you could, since you do a lot more with malware infections and such, maybe you could go through that with us.
Well, the thing about the vast majority of malware is it needs a way to contact command and control. So if the hackers can't talk to the malware, it doesn't do them much good, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Unless it's some kind of a worm where it's just self-propagating and does its thing and doesn't really send any information back to the attacker. It needs communication somehow. So that's where this DNS sinkholing comes into play. So the malware, once it's dropped, it tries to communicate back home. Mm-hmm. And how does it do it? Sometimes it does direct IP, and that's kind of risky for the attacker because they have a hard-coded IP in their executable that it contacts to. That IP can be traced back to them somehow, whether they whether it belongs to, like, say, in the cloud or something, and then they connect to it, and then law enforcement can see where that connection comes from and can eventually get to them. Another technique they have is to use DNS, where they're constantly moving their IP from place to place and just using a DNS query to find out where the malware does to find out where command and control is. So they'll run a DNS query and be able to communicate with the attacker or the attacker's command and control system via DNS query. So a DNS sinkhole is where the good guys take that particular DNS or URL, and they'll basically sinkhole it. And that means they'll either redirect it back to 127.0.0.1, or they'll set up their own fake command and control center, command and control server, and accept requests from particular pieces of malware, right? And this does a couple of things. Well, first of all, it severs the communication between the malware and the people behind the malware, and it also renders the malware usually useless to the attacker.
Mm-hmm.
If malware can't communicate back to command and control, then it just sits there. It's like, okay, what do I do? I can continue to keylog, all these passwords and whatever, but I can never send it back because, you've basically cut the cord at that point. Right?
Yeah. Well, we're thinking about malware, but there are some legitimate reasons to want to use DNS sinkholing. A lot of let's say you're one of those companies that here's a good example. I was listening to another podcast and they were talking about how Singapore is some of the companies in Singapore are actually blocking internet access to workers, and they're setting up like internet kiosks where people could go to surf the web, surf Facebook, do whatever. And what they were doing was that could be one way that a company could stop people from doing drive-by downloads or whatever. They can sinkhole all the unnecessary sites. Like if you don't want people to go to Facebook, you could sinkhole Facebook, or any chat roulette or Snapchat or anything like those, or Minecraft, League of Legends, those kinds of things. Typical time wasters that most people. Not like myself. I work all the time. My boss is listening. I'm working 15-hour days and stuff. But
in fact, you have a camera like right next to you that's hooked up to your corporate network, right?
That's right. So
they can keep tabs on you.
They do that. Yeah. That's why I feel weird about being at my desk all the time. But so you could sinkhole legitimate sites if you didn't want your organization to be able to access.
If you've got a corporate policy against, say, I don't know, what's that online gaming thing?
Steam, yeah. So if you got a corporate policy against Steam, you could sinkhole those DNSs. You can sinkhole YouTube. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, these are not very popular for people who like to go to those things and would probably rebel against the company, but sinkholing is a viable method by which you would do so. And it's kind of hard to do the ones that are large like Facebook, because they use like content development networks like Akamai and those, which have hundreds of IP addresses that you can pull Facebook from. But for legit sites that maybe you don't want people to go to, or you've seen that your company's accessing ESPN or something like that for a lot, maybe you want to sinkhole that for a certain amount of time. That's always something that can be done. I think we could talk about sinkholing being done at different levels too. Earl had mentioned last week in his podcast that law enforcement like to take down botnets and command and control servers. The way they do that is you can do sinkholing at different levels. You could send out a GPO to a Windows box to update the host's file. And each host, like you could stop Bob from going to Facebook if he's on it 20 hours a day or something. You could also do it from the corporate website and affect everybody, or if you're, if it's too large and it's a systematic thing, an ISP could even block. And they have done so, or you can turn on like quality of service kind of things where you can slow down the traffic to that site, or sync an entire site. Like Brazil blocked WhatsApp. I'm sure they did either DNS sinkholing, or they just took that route out of their firewalls.
Right. And then China can block social networking for their country, right?
Yeah.
So they just sinkhole all the DNSs, or I'm sure they have their firewall. So there's different methods they can do it, but
and it can be done at different levels. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So setting up one is fairly simple. There's a link in the show notes to an ISC forum post where you can use Bind, which is what is that? The Berkeley crap. It's like the Berkeley DNS. So Bind DNS stands for
doesn't matter.
Well, yeah, it kind of does, because it does mean something, right? Bind stands for Berkeley Internet Name Domain. That's one of the oldest DNS implementations out there. So this ISC post is from some gentleman named Guy. Hey, Guy, who talked about how you can set up a zone in your DNS to redirect everything to a sinkhole. It's fairly well done. There's lots of posts asking questions about that. So it's important to set up your zones properly. But of course, it seems so easy for him, but there's some issues with creating sinkholing. There's you mentioned one earlier. What about the it doesn't stop worms?
Right. It doesn't stop worms because worms don't need a DNS server.
Mm-hmm.
They just scan the network looking for vulnerable hosts or other hosts, like Configure, right? It just scanned the network looking for vulnerable systems, and then it would just exploit them, right? It doesn't need DNS to do that.
Okay.
If the IP is hard-coded, obviously it doesn't even use DNS, so DNS sinkholing would be useless in that case.
Yeah, I was wondering why malware writers would bother with going through and setting up DNS or setting up a domain. Wouldn't it just be easier to put an IP address range in there? Because if the agent is constantly talking to the CNC server, would it not be easier just to push an update back to the server and go, okay, today you're using this IP address, in 18 hours, consider this one to be gone and this be the new IP address?
Yeah, there are some malware authors that not only put different IP addresses in there based on time or based on sequence, but they can put different DNS servers in there as well based on some pattern that they've developed. And guys who do advanced malware analysis can figure these patterns out. And there have been cases where they've actually registered DNS sinkholes based on those patterns.
Okay.
Right. So in the future, or whatever is next in the pattern, they'll be able to register that domain name before the attackers, or the attackers won't register that one, but they'll register some other one in the sequence.
Yeah.
Like there'll be 1,000 different domains that the malware could use, but the attackers only register like 10 or 100 of those.
Yeah, and of course that all goes out the window if the malware is using known good, or I say known good, but known good to them DNS servers. So you can't sinkhole something that is not using your DNS server for resolution.
Right. One way some attackers get around it is to hard code the DNS server that they request from. Right.
Yeah.
So if that is available. To counter that, though, you could require that people within your organization only use a corporate DNS server for resolution. And if they try to use a different one, well, the firewall will block that.
So anything going, so I guess you could say anything outgoing on port 53 would automatically get redirected to your DNS server if it's egress, right?
That can happen, yes.
So
Or you
that
simply,
would break a lot of malware. What's what you're saying?
yes, it would if they're hard coding DNS. Now, if they're not, obviously your DNS server will go out to, um, different name servers on the internet to fetch whatever names it doesn't have cached. So, yeah, that's a possibility as well. But if you wanted to sinkhole a particular piece of malware, like you're being targeted, and you want to just quickly sinkhole that, you have a requirement in your company to use your own DNS servers. You can sinkhole that there. So yeah, those are the ways. Those are some of the issues that face you face with trying to sinkhole um, malware for command and control. Um,
Okay, so
and another thing is DNS sinkholing is likened to threat intelligence, right? You got to know which ones to sinkhole. Unless you're being targeted in an attack, you don't know what malware is using what DNS names, that sort of thing. So it may take a while for that threat intelligence to come to you. And it's a lot of work following certain websites that have these DNS entries for malware for attackers that are going around in the wild.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
For example, the Dridex botnet that was taken down, they were able to sinkhole that as well. And if you were keeping up with threat intel and you had a sinkhole in your organization, you could put those entries into your DNS and sinkhole those just to prevent attacks, from that point on with this particular variant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think we've got a couple of links in our show notes to DNS black hole servers that or lists that you can download to bolster your hosts file to get rid of either adware, possible adware, those kinds of things. So one of the other issues that came up that I found in my reading was that there's some legal issues that could crop up when you do external sinkholing, because victim machines are now contacting a server that you control. So really, you've kind of changed ownership of the command and control server to yourself. So there appears to be a bit of a gray area there at some point. I know that. When you're sinkholing, and Earl had mentioned that law enforcement like to go and do stuff like this. I assume that that's what they're doing. They take over the command and control server either by DNS entry, or they go to the ISP itself that's running the DNS server, the command and control server, and just physically take it over. And at that point,
or they tell it to point to a different IP that they control. So
yeah,
they'll set up their own fake command and control server, and they can accept requests from malware, whatever it is, and they can, see, the legal issues are, who has that particular malware. So if company X is getting like freaking owned by this stuff because you're receiving a lot of requests from the malware, right? That, hey, they're being targeted. Something's going on there. They've got 10,000 requests a minute coming to your sinkhole server.
Mm-hmm.
They've been attacked. What do you do with that information? So there's a gray area there. You've got some intelligence on that particular company. That they were victims of malware. Even though you sinkholed it and you're preventing this communication, you know a little bit about them, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what do? You go short sell stock on that company, So there's a lot of things you can do with that information.
Yeah, exactly. That's good OSINT. If you know that somebody's been victim of a breach, or you yourself know that you can cause a denial of service on a box, you may buy their stock at a after you have denial of serviced the hell out of them and made them, shaken people's confidence in them, so they drop a couple of dollars and you pick it up on the sly. Then the stock recovers, and you've made bank. You may get them on both sides, because if or you're sending out malware and you're using an exploit kit, that may shake their confidence, to where they'd lose enough money where they'd pay the ransom, and then you would mop up on the stock market as well. Wow. So so we were talking about external sinkholing. Apparently, it's a criminal act in a lot of jurisdictions to even run a legitimate takeover of a box. So that's why
you're just trying to help, man. Come on.
Okay, easy, buddy. I mean, the CFAA is bad, badly written, but for some, it's actually supposed to do some good. But yeah, even a white hat. I think I heard another news article about a guy. He figured out how to take over the bot, and all he did was make it harmless by putting in a funny message instead of what the command and control server was doing. So, yeah. So even if you do self-destruct a botnet yourself, you could still be held liable because you're accessing a box incorrectly. So you mentioned before the podcast, you were like, well, what is a malicious sinkhole? And, I think we kind of answered the question, but in reverse, if you're wanting to, stop people from going to Facebook, you could sinkhole the IP addresses for Facebook. Well, you could take it one step further, and you could sinkhole somebody to go to facebook.com, but instead of going to actually facebook.com, you could send them to a phishing site, make it look like they're going to log into what appears to be Facebook, recreate the surface of the site with something like Social Engineering Toolkit or something like that. They attempt to log in, and all you've done is now captured their credentials for later use. You could do that, I guess, as a pen testing measure, or you could do it being a bad guy.
Right.
Yeah. So that's a way you could negatively use sinkholing to ill effect, and
I think, have you ever seen that red screen that comes on Chrome or Firefox that says this site is bad? You ever seen that?
Yeah, I've seen that. I just click through it and go on.
Yeah, that's kind of a sinkhole. It's not really DNS sinkholing, but it's where Chrome or Firefox will get the intel that this site is a malicious site, and they'll prevent you from going there unless you click through and say, I trust it.
Well, that's the OSCP, right? That's the Online Certificate Status Protocol. So I mean, it's basically doing like a almost like a secondary certificate lookup to see if certificates are being spoofed. So I guess that's another way of doing a sinkholing. You could if you're going to facebook.com, you're expecting the browser is expecting a certain certificate chain, certain level of trust, and you can't replicate that with a spoofed site. Now, if you've turned off that OCSP, Online Certificate Status Protocol, then technically you could probably have some people get around that, but you wouldn't want your users to turn that stuff off.
You can also use Bro, that I've read, to sinkhole sites. If you have Bro IDS, and you can actually enter in if you're people go to a certain DNS location, you can sinkhole that with Bro.
Okay. Is that coming from personal experience? Have you ever used an IDS to sinkhole things? Bro is a host-based IDS, right? I've only ran it on my Mac OS box. I haven't actually ran it as an environment. So.
Yeah, well, a lot of IDS and IPS, IPS in this case, have the ability to actually detect either sinkhole, or I guess that's what IPS really does, right? If it sees the signature, they just block it. That's in a way, I guess, sinkholing it. Sure. But the threat intel that comes in from some of these managed services also will say, "Hey, this is a bad site, and we've already sinkholed it," and then they can detect whether or not your people are going to a sinkhold site, right? So they'll block that.
Okay.
So back to the issue, where is it criminal, a criminal act to publicly sinkhole certain sites? Even if you're doing it for good, right? You're trying to help people. It could be considered a criminal act, but these IPSs will block that as well if they know that a certain site is being sinkholed. That way, if 1,000 people in your organization go to a bad site, if it's being blocked, they'll never go there.
Yeah, and I guess you get those with regular rule or
Rule updates.
rule updates, or if you subscribe to a threat intelligence feed, you can get Suricata or Yara rule updates that will block various nasty traffic to help you out with that.
Yep.
Very cool. All right. Well, we got a ton of links in our show notes here with regard to principles of malware. We got some dark reading stuff, the SANS how-to on how to do sinkholes. There's a couple of good papers there from some GIAC gold level folks. If you're using Palo Alto Network, Pan OS, there was a whole how-to in that I found on how to do sinkholing with Palo Alto Network. So if you've got any kit at work, you can set it up pretty easily with that. So yeah, that was great. Mr. Betcher, how would, if they wanted to talk with you a little bit about malware or anything else, how would they get a hold of you?
They can reach me on Twitter at BetcherPwned, BOETTCHERPWNED.
You're going to be at SANS DFIR, right, in Austin at the end of this month?
Yeah, I'll be there. Say hi if you're there.
Yeah, we'd also love to reach out if you are interested in coming on the podcast. Hit up Mr. Betcher while you're over there. So,
yeah,
he's gonna come back from DFIR with a lot of good stuff for us to talk about with digital forensics and stuff. Because he's
yeah.
I definitely want to pick your brain about some DFIR stuff, not just malware and stuff, but forensics and how you do proper forensics. It's going to be some good stuff, I have a feeling. So. What's your business? You got a business where you're selling something. You're going to be at Arsenal, Black Hat Arsenal for that, right?
I don't know. It depends on if we get accepted. So if we get accepted to Black Hat Arsenal, I'll definitely be at Black Hat. So, I'll announce it if we get accepted. I'm sure there's a lot of good tools out there. So my company is IMF Security, and the tool is LogMD.
Right on.
If you haven't heard about it by now. So
I wouldn't say we've pimped it out enough on here, but we have pimped it out a little bit. So it's okay. I mean, who hasn't looked at a Windows log file and gritted their teeth and was like, oh my God, it's awful. So, I mean, it's a nice way of, rehashing information and making it more readable. So I can't imagine how that wouldn't be a win-win for a blue team. So,
yeah, and it's free.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So, our podcast, the Breaking Down Security podcast, is at BrakeSec on Twitter, BRAKESEC. You can follow me, I guess. I'm at Brian Brake, BRYAN BRAKE. We're on iTunes. We'd love some feedback on iTunes. We only have 13 people on iTunes who have given us some feedback, but literally half of our downloads come from iTunes. I know.
Time out. So here's the clue, right? When somebody gives me a hash, one of the first things I do is I put it into VirusTotal and see what it is. If VirusTotal knows about it or if they don't know about it. That's what I do. So back to iTunes.
Yeah. We're on iTunes. Like I said, we'd really love some feedback on iTunes because 13 is abysmal. I mean, even defensive security's got more feedback than that. So, a couple of comments would be great if you could, take a few seconds when you're downloading those to put it up on iTunes. We're on Tumblr, we're on Stitcher, we're on TuneIn Radio. Hey, I found out a lot of the new cars that have apps inside of them, you can get TuneIn Radio or you can get Stitcher or something, and you can listen to our podcast in your car on your way to work. And our podcast counts as CPEs. If you have your CISP and you need to keep up with that, podcast count as CPE credits. So I listen to other podcasts for my CPEs. Technically, any prep time we're supposed to get credit for, but I don't never count that. So, but yeah, I mean, we're all over the place. Yeah. Feel free to tell your friends. We still have the raffle for the DerbyCon thing going on. So if you support us on our Patreon, which we thank all of our Patreon followers, if you support us at the $20 level there, you can get into the drawing. Or if you donate for every $50 to Hackers for Charity, you can get an entry to win. So right now we have a couple of people who've donated to Hackers for Charity, so they have like 3 entries into the drawing, so they have a better chance of winning than just the one. So that's always helpful. And Hackers for Charity does good work. We've met Johnny Long. We've interviewed him on the podcast. He was a great guy. So any last thoughts, Mr. Betcher, on blackholing and not blackholing, but sinkholing DNS?
Sinkholing.
Yeah.
No, it seems interesting if you want to try and do that in your organization. If it depends on corporate policy, things like that. But yeah, it could be something to look into, and it's definitely something you need to know about.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Before you enact something like this at work, you might want to, discuss the unintended consequences, because the minute you started, blocking things like Facebook or whatever, people are going to start rioting, especially your C-level folks. So,
Yep.
Yeah, and it could be a valuable tool for you if you're analyzing malware, especially if it's a malware that you can redirect in that manner. So it's always
or if you analyze malware and you find that it is going to a certain CNC, then you can sinkhole it in your organization and be able to detect on it. If anybody tries to go to that, alert on it.
Yeah.
So
and
it's a good tool in that respect. It's just another tool in your arsenal if you choose to use it, right?
Yep, exactly. And, I was thinking about that. The ones that we mentioned that use hard-coded IPs and dynamically changing, if you could, for the amount of time that they're using that hard-coded IP, you could probably redirect the IP address itself to go to another site inside your ACLs and your firewall. You could probably redirect the traffic, that way. That might be a way to do it. So that was something I was thinking about. I don't know if it's entirely possible, but I would try to find some way to redirect that IP traffic somewhere else. The layer 2 traffic. So, layer 3 traffic. TCP's layer 4. So yeah, if you can redirect your layer 3 traffic, that'd be a good way to do it.
And you can sinkhole different top level domains too, like .con, C-O-N. Just sinkhole those, right?
Exactly.
You can sinkhole entire countries if you don't trust them, right?
That's true. Or .cn if you want to, there's no reason for any of your employees to be going to China or Russia or Russian sites. Anything .ro, .cn, .br if they don't do Brazil. So, or if you're in Brazil and you don't want people to come to U.S. sites, .us. So there you go. So, all right. Great discussion, Mr. Betcher. Hope everybody enjoyed this. This has been Breaking Down Security. Have a great week, and we'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.